The Talkshop.
It is the Talkshop on SAFM South Africa's news and information leader. Just wrapped up my conversation with Lundy, founding member of the Young Generation Thinkers. It's 34701 to send in your SMSs. I'll read those just before the top of the hour at 8 o'clock, and you'll tell me your thoughts and some of the views that Mgini holds and the fact that he's going to be a presidential candidate. How do you feel about that? A young man who's starting his own political party. 34701. Let's move on, though. It is, of course, 23 minutes before 8 o'clock, and I'm joined on the line by Guy Lundy, who's a partner at Odgers Berndtson South Africa. Guy, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Lundy. Thanks very much for having me.
We're talking about combating resume fraud. It's been a very hot topic in months. We've got several high-profile South African execs that have been exposed for having lied about their qualifications and skills and achievements on their resumes. And in some cases, this has led to dismissal or resignation following intense public scrutiny. So we're asking, do people actually know how career-limiting that kind of fraud is? Guy?
No. I don't think people generally do reckon on how career limiting it is. I think generally what happens is that it starts out as a little bit of an embellishment or a little bit of a white lie in the early stages of one's career in order to try to get yourself into a position that you might not otherwise get. So often what will happen is that somebody will say that they have a CA or they have an MBA when actually they didn't quite finish the exam or they didn't do the thesis. And, you know, if they don't have the MBA, they won't get the job. The problem is that once that story has been told, it's very difficult to be untold, and it kind of follows them through their career until the point when it gets found out when they're at a much more senior position.
But what are the reasons for people lying in their resumes?
Well, it's usually starting out with feeling like they are not going to get something if they don't have a qualification, or if the role that they had in their previous job was not as senior as they'd like to make it out to be. So they're essentially just embellishing on a part truth. It's usually not a complete outright lie. It's just a part truth that gets told as being a bigger story than it actually is. And it's really to try and get into something that they wouldn't otherwise get into.
But what do people generally lie about in their resumes?
Well, the most common one is qualifications. So it's usually where a qualification has been incomplete. So we've seen a lot of this with PhDs, we're studied towards them and not actually received them, MBAs, CAs, etc. And unfortunately, employers don't necessarily check. So they believe it at face value. The other things are things like titles and roles of previous employment, saying that you were the sales director when actually you were just the sales manager. Often gaps in one's career are not declared. So if somebody went without working for 6 months or more, they'll say that they actually worked till later than they did and started earlier than they did in the next role. And then, you know, dates of employment become something that gets played around with as well to show that you were in one company longer than you actually were.
And do people lie about salary history?
Yes, there is that as well, and that's obviously done in order to try to push your future salary up. You know, your prospects are higher if you were actually earning something more. And again, you know, it all comes down to whether the companies are doing the checks, and that's something that we do as an executive search firm. We do it as a standard. We will do those checks from beginning to end. But many times companies don't actually do that, so they'll just believe it at face value.
And I'm sure there are lies that are told about age, references, even credit to criminal records as well. Yes,
and you know the thing is that these days with social media and with information on the internet, it's very difficult for somebody to completely hide things.
Yeah, it is.
So, you know, I had an example yesterday where I was speaking to a very senior candidate who happened to be in Nigeria, and I'd done my research on him beforehand, and it turned out that he'd been arrested for corruption back in 2005. And so I had to check on exactly what the truth was behind that story, because, you know, otherwise I could just choose to ignore it. But really, it's not worth it.
But how much do people actually lie? And you talk about having researched someone and looked them up on social media and so forth. How much do people lie on sites like LinkedIn, for instance?
Well, LinkedIn, the problem with a site like LinkedIn is that it's completely unchecked. So what you put onto LinkedIn is what you put onto LinkedIn. And that's something that we strongly encourage people to do, is to not believe what's on LinkedIn. Don't take it for what's there. You need to double check, and you need to look for inconsistencies. Very often we'll see a profile on LinkedIn, and then we'll see the CV come through, and there are disagreements between the two in terms of the names of titles, the dates that employment ran from and to, and so on. So the moment you see an inconsistency, life simply raises flags, and one needs to start having a look into it.
Yeah, but Guy, you ran a background check on someone, obviously, because you wanted that person to fill a position. To be quite honest, a lot of employers don't have the time to do that. You have a post, you need it to be filled now. There's work to be done. We don't have the time to go and do background checks.
Well, that's all questionable, really. I mean, if you don't have the time now, do you have the time to deal with the fallout when it turns out that it was actually incorrect? So one does have to take the time or pay the fee. If you're looking at outsourcing it to somebody like ourselves, we will take all of that off your hands and make sure that you don't have to spend the time. But of course, then it comes at a cost. But it's certainly something that is worth spending on or worth spending time on now, so that 6 months or 6 years from now you don't have a scandal on your hands. Only in government, by the way. It happens in the private sector quite a lot. Recently, one of the very senior leaders of Walmart in the States was fired for having lied about his qualifications.
All right, I'm taking your calls on 0891 104 207. We're talking combating resume fraud, 0891 104 207. And send your SMSs to 34701. Chatting to Guy Lundy, partner at Odgers Berndtson South Africa. Talk to me about Odgers Berndtson.
We're an international executive search firm, and we place very senior executives within a range of sectors, primarily in the private sector. Both in South Africa and across Sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay, and then obviously you can give me tips on what employers should be looking out for to ensure that the resume that they've got in front of them is not too good to be true.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the primary thing is really to be charmed by a candidate. It's very easy for a very charming candidate to sort of whisk you through his or her CV and enable you or encourage you to overlook certain gaps. Also, don't go for the first candidate. People are very often, because they're in a hurry and because this person seems like a really good option, they'll rush into it. But it's really about being thorough, and it's about taking time and doing proper checks, either doing them yourself or using somebody like ourselves to actually go through that process for you.
And then, what are some of the mistakes that employers make when employing someone?
Well, I think probably the biggest mistake is not doing references. So taking the CV at face value, believing the story that the candidate is telling you, being charmed by that story, and then not actually either their direct references or calling people in their previous employers, for example. So. If they say that they worked for a certain company in a certain period, you call that company, you find out if that was true, and you speak to somebody who was a colleague to understand what was actually behind them leaving. Were they asked to leave? Did they choose to leave, etc.? So we usually speak to 5 or more people if we're going to be putting a candidate forward as a preferred candidate for a role. It's time consuming, but that way you get a tremendous amount of insight into that person that you won't get from speaking to the person.
And also don't give up if the references and the numbers on the list of references just don't go through, because you can't assume that then it's network issues or whatever it may be, because those references could then be fake. Yes,
exactly. And there are cases of references that have been set up. So getting your best friend to act as the CEO of the previous company that you'd worked for. So yeah, I would always encourage using their references and then using your own references as well. And very importantly in speaking to those references is listening out for what they don't say. Because often referees will be loath to say negative things because they don't want to have something held against them if the candidate doesn't get the job and blames them for not getting it because they said something negative. So you've got to look out for what the referee is not saying and then probe that.
But it is business, Guy, after all. At the end of the day, everybody's got to work. It's business, and sometimes, you're not going to lie on a bed of roses. Is it cynicism to say that in business you will run into your fair share of lies?
No, I don't think it's cynicism. I think it's reality. I think in the world we are going to come across our fair share of liars. And unfortunately, many of those lies are very small lies. But when you're looking at somebody, particularly at the levels that we operate at, where you're looking at managing directors, CEOs, etc., you really can't be lenient on somebody's integrity. The person has to be acting with integrity. So if they are saying that they have something, they'd better have something. Otherwise, how are they going to behave in operating in your business with your other employees? How are they going to be operating with your clients, your suppliers, etc.?
Is this a challenge only with senior positions? Is it a challenge with junior positions as well?
No, it's throughout. And very often it starts actually at the more junior positions because of the fact that people are climbing the career ladder. And so they are needing to try and sell themselves as hard as they can. And when you're writing your own CV, you are very tempted to put things in there that are not made correct.
Does that not speak to a lack of skills in South Africa? People are going the desperate route of embellishment in their CVs and lying about certain things in their CVs. Does that not speak to the lack of skills that's available and the desperation to have those skills?
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily speaking to a lack of skills. I think that it speaks to a lot of ambition, and people having very strong ambitions that they want to move through as quickly as they can and get promoted and get higher paying jobs as quickly as they can, rather than kind of putting in the hard yards and spending the time to be able to skill themselves up genuinely. There's certainly an element of that, but I have to say that it's not only South Africa. It happens around the world.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately just part of human nature that people tell white lies, which then become part of their life story, and hopefully catch up with them at a later stage.
Give me a call on 0891 104207. We're talking about combating resume fraud, and I'm keen to hear your experience. Are you an employer that's taken someone on and later realized that what's on their CV was not the truth? Have you perhaps added a few untruths to your own resume? 0891 104207. That's 0891 104207 to give me a call. Send your SMSs as well to 34701. That's 34701. The impact for the employee, Guy, if you do lie on your CV, because ultimately, it happens because you think no one's going to find out. I'm going to get away with this. But what is the impact when you are found out?
Well, the impact can be devastating. I would imagine that in some instances, particularly within smaller private companies, there will be people that will overlook it. But if you're in a larger organization that is ruled by things like the regulations of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the Companies Act, etc., and then if you look in the government space where you've got the Public Finance Management Act and various other regulations that oversee the governance of those organizations, it can be absolutely devastating to be caught out like that. And there are plenty of examples, such as the Pallo Jordan case, where it turned out that he actually wasn't Dr. Pallo Jordan, and look at what's happened to his career, and so many other cases like that. So it must be a terrible thing to have to live with. To know for years and years that there's that risk of being caught out, that somebody's going to find out that actually you're not the doctor that you've been going around saying you are for the last 30 years.
Yeah. 0891104207 to give me a call. Fred is in Cape Town. Fred, good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for calling, Fred.
Good. I would like to say maybe on this subject or in terms of for the employee and the employer.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that which we most people probably get it very difficult to get jobs is you put your reference, someone as a reference, and obviously when you're putting someone as a reference, 95% of the people that employs, if you left the company, they wouldn't want to recommend you or to recommend someone. What they would have actually expected you probably to work for them for the whole life or something like that. Results you end up having as very difficult in terms of putting whom should you put as a reference, you know. So you end up putting someone who is not actually, we've never probably worked with you or a friend. Such things actually they happen. And so I would not want to say maybe when you are employing someone to rely on the reference. Because on the reference they don't give a true picture. Many people like about that. Because they put a friend, but they can't put the former employees because they will know, they will say something bad. You see. So I don't know how that can be actually, yes.
No, that's an interesting one, Fred, and I'm going to bring that one back to you, Guy, because that's a real frustration that Fred is talking about. You've left a company. You might not have left on the best of terms. So how do you then have references on your CV? Because ultimately, if you did have a good relationship with them, you'd still be there.
Yeah, well, not necessarily. I have to say people move, and companies understand that people move. Everybody who runs a company has moved at some point in their career. Perhaps not outside of the company, but certainly they've moved countries or they've moved departments, etc. So it is a natural thing for people to move, and if you've left under good terms, which is probably the majority of cases, certainly one would hope so. Then you would be very capable of using references from the company previously. We usually ask people to give us references who they have reported to in their previous companies, and also people who acted as colleagues at the same level. And very often people will be completely frank. But obviously you're going to choose referees you feel are going to say something positive about you, which is, of course, why we then speak to other referees from the same organization at a similar time, if we can find them, so that we can actually corroborate that story. But I wouldn't say that the majority of cases people are leaving unhappily. I think in most cases people leave under positive circumstances. They have a leaving party and everybody wishes them well. And in the crowd that happen to be there's got to be at least one referee that's going to say something good about you.
We hope. James is in Witbank. James, good evening.
Thank you. Yes, I think a CV does not mean much, especially a South African CV. My friend, he had an engineering shop. People come to him looking for a job. He said, yes, I pay you for 2-3 days. He tested them. He tells them, do me that, do that welding, do that, construct something and something like that. Yes, you're good. No, you're no good. Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Okay, James.
What about that?
Okay. Okay, so do the work and CVs don't mean that much. I don't know if you agree with that, Guy, but I just also, you can respond to that if you like, but I also just want to look at some of the things that employers should be looking out for, especially in interviews, just so you're able to make sure that what is in front of you in the CV matches up with the person that's in front of you. Could you be looking out for signs in the person's body language?
Absolutely. So, what one can often pick up is when you start asking more in-depth questions about what somebody says they have done on their CV, you can pick up when they are uncertain in the way that they're responding about it. And that can come through with things like dates. I've had a case where I asked somebody, of a role that he left 8 years or so, he wasn't sure which month of the year he left. And, it's not that long ago to not have remembered at what time of the year he'd actually left his role. So that then leads you into asking more questions and trying to understand more about, why did you leave, what actually happened, when did you really start? Because very often people's CVs will just show a year. They don't show the month and the year. So, when you start to ask more probing questions and you pick up that there's a level of discomfort in providing straight answers, it definitely leads you to want to ask more in-depth questions as to exactly why this person's not being 100% comfortable with telling you the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. How do we get a hold of Odgers Berndtson?
Well, we have offices in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. If you want to get a hold of us on the internet, you could send an email odgersberndtson.co.za, and that's spelled ODGERS BERNDTSON .co.za. Or otherwise you could call our Johannesburg or Cape Town offices. The numbers are on the website.
All right, I've gotten an SMS here that says, your guest is very kind. He makes excuses for these folk when they are just downright dishonest. And who wants someone dishonest on their staff? It ends up permeating one's entire workforce. Great program, thank you. That's very true.
Yeah.
It permeates the entire workforce.
Yeah. And if the values of the organization are of honesty and integrity, that's precisely the reason why you can't keep somebody who has lied on their CV on. Because it just simply sends a message to everybody else that this honesty and integrity of the leader is going to affect the whole organization. That's why I say it's devastating for the person who has told the lie. It's also devastating for the organization, and the organization really does have to deal with it fairly swiftly and decisively.
Guy, it is a very serious discussion, but I think, South Africans have chuckled once or twice when you think about people that lie on their resumes. And so maybe tell us about one person that you've dealt with and the kind of lies that you've seen on resumes.
Well, the thing that I've come across most often is dates, I think, where, people have left earlier than they say that they have on their CV. The other one is of course people who are in the process of leaving, who don't mention that they're in the process of leaving. So, they will go through a whole process with one of our clients, and not share the fact that they've actually been fired or resigned, and make out as if they're still working full time there, when in fact they're actually no longer at that employer. And we had a case like that, and we had to end the process because if you're not going to reveal that, then there's a serious question around what else are you not revealing. Yeah,
it's desperation breeds deception. It's not right, but it's partially true.
Yeah.
Guy, thank you so much for giving us your time. Just stay with us, because I've got two callers that would like to chat to you when we come back from the news. It's 8 o'clock and Greg Host has the news. Zakele is in Durban. Zakele, good evening.
Yes, good evening. How are you, Lundy?
I'm very well. Thank you for calling.
Good. So I wanted to ask the risk of putting, let's say you've got a recent employer, you left the employer because the relationship was bad. So now, what is the risk of putting that person, maybe your former supervisor, as your reference in your CV? Because sometimes you find that the next employer would maybe want to contact your former employer, or maybe to speak to the supervisor to ask about you. They say that I left the employer because my supervisor, between him and me was very bad. In such a way that I had to leave the job. So I'm asking the risk of putting that person in your CV. Is it okay, or maybe?
Okay.
Okay, all right.
All right, Zakele. Dr. Colette Mabaso is in Johannesburg. Dr. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you, Nalini?
I'm very well. Thank you for calling in.
I'm fine. Look, I just want your guest to just comment on this one. Look, there's the so-called executive appointment, né? normally you realize that every executive would like to surround himself or herself with people he or she trusts. And so if there's a particular position in a company, they would like to hire somebody close to them. So even if the CV does not actually match the requirements, they will try to forge it around. And let me give an example. They want to appoint an HR manager who will, of course, overlook the verification of all resumes that will be around. And I think that is part of it that actually encourage a resume fraud. I would like him to comment on that. How common is that in what is termed executive appointments?
Okay. All right, Guy?
Great. So just to answer the first question in terms of the risk of using a former employer or supervisor as a referee, I think it's important to note that you get to choose your own referees. So if you feel that a referee is somebody, or if you feel that somebody who you had a personal clash with for reasons outside of your own competency, don't use them as a reference. But, be aware that there may well be somebody calling those people anyway for a soft reference that we call it, somebody who hasn't actually been put on your CV. But if you feel that the person just simply didn't like you, they them on your CV as a referee. There's nothing underhand about that. In terms of people hiring people who they know and who are close to them because they can trust them, it happens quite a lot. Not in the assignments that we do, because otherwise they wouldn't be using us. Companies that hire us to do an executive search process are specifically choosing not to hire friends, family, people who they know from previous positions, etc., because they want an independent process to be undertaken by a company that is not connected to either them or the candidate directly. And so we're able to keep it clean, to keep it thorough, and to do a full-blown process to make sure that they get absolutely the best person for the role, rather than someone that they happen to mountain bike with on the weekend.
Right. Let's wrap it up there, Guy. Give us for those that would like to perhaps hire and fill executive roles in their company and would like to do it the clean way.
Yes. So our website is www.odgersberndtson.co.za, and that's ODGERSBERNDTSON.co.za.
Guy Lundy, partner at Odgers Berndtson Sub-Sahara. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thanks for having me.